Hey there, so I want to do a video on iodine, thyroid issues, and oxalates. And the moral of this story is going to be that not every rabbit hole is necessarily worth going down, and some rabbit holes might actually lead to harm. Now, I never had a thyroid issue in my entire life until the year 2024, which was the year I started to go down rabbit holes, and I discovered um, David Brownstein and his high dose iodine protocol. Now, David Brownstein is a world leading expert on iodine and thyroid issues, and he even has a famous book about iodine. And he's been going on podcasts, especially in 2024, talking about how he's seen success in treating hypothyroid and other thyroid issues with high dose iodine, basically iodine doses that are up to 50 milligrams. Now, the standard RDA for iodine is basically like 100 or 200 micrograms, which is multiple orders of magnitude lower than that. So I was very suspicious of the gap, and I wasn't sure who was right. There's also people like Eric Berg and William Davis who have been recommending lower doses of iodine. So maybe like 1 milligram or even less, like micrograms of hundreds of micrograms of iodine. It was very confusing, and there was no consensus in the community about what amount of iodine you truly need. But David Brownstein was arguing that iodine is needed for every single cell in your body, not just your thyroid. And furthermore, there's been a massive, basically, conspiracy to expose us to other halides, other halogens that compete with iodine. So things like fluoride, which is put in our water, as well as chlorine in our swimming pools, as well as bromine and bromide, which are put in medications, put in seat cushions, put in plastics. And all of these things, all of those halogens compete with iodine. And the argument is that they sort of kick iodine out of your body and they make you iodine deficient. And that's very compelling. It was a very compelling conspiracy theory to me. And I still to this day believe that there's some truth to that conspiracy because it's very well known that fluoride has been intentionally put in our water. And it would make a lot of sense to me that people would also want to poison the swimming pools with chlorine, not to mention our drinking water, and similarly the issues with bromine. However, I do have personal experience here, which is that I actually adopted David Brownstein's protocol in the fall of 2024. This was when I was on the keto diet, so I was still eating both meat and veggies at the time in 2024. Now I'm strict carnivore. But at that time, I had been on the keto diet for about half a year, and I had tremendous success on the keto diet. My health was doing great. I was sort of the best health of my life. And I thought, well, let's see if I'm going to optimize it even further by taking some iodine just to kind of detox my body of the other halogens. And so I started off taking Lugol's iodine solution, and I was taking, multiple milligrams a day, maybe like sometimes 3 milligrams, sometimes 6 milligrams, sometimes 9 milligrams, which are probably the biggest doses my body has ever seen in its life. I've never exposed myself to such high doses. And sure enough, I got a ton of side effects. I got diarrhea, I got insomnia, and I also got pain in my thyroid, and I got fluctuations between hyperthyroid symptoms and hypothyroid. And eventually, my body settled down to more of a hypothyroid state where I was having cold feet, cold hands. Basically, my body was feeling very cold in its extremities. And so I was having these cold flashes, right? And those are classic symptoms of hypothyroid. And like I said, I had never had any thyroid issues in my entire life. I was just trying to basically see if this theory was true, that we're all iodine deficient and we need high dose iodine. Now, the problem is that the people who proposed the high dose iodine protocol basically argue that you're just detoxing. So they say that, oh, these are some kind of reactions to the fact that you're kicking out bromine and kicking out fluoride, and it's circulating throughout your body, and so these are all causing problems. But that pain in my thyroid was real, and that was kind of scary, to be honest. And the hypothyroid symptoms were also pretty scary because I had never had thyroid problems in my life. So I just wanted to say that I like if those symptoms just lasted like a week or two, it'd have been no big deal. But the problem is those symptoms lasted for a couple months. So I basically did this protocol throughout the entire fall of 2024 for on the order of 3 months, and I had those symptoms throughout the whole 3 months. And eventually I said, you know what, maybe this is not good for me, and I started to wean off of the iodine. Of course, the thing that was really scary is that even when I weaned off the iodine, I would still have some lingering symptoms. And so um, at that time, I was also considering a move from the keto diet to the carnivore diet, going strict carnivore. Um, but it was interesting that I wanted to expose some flaws in the high dose iodine protocol. Now, in that protocol, they say you need certain cofactors to go with your high dose iodine. And two of the cofactors they mention are high dose vitamin C and somewhat high dose selenium. And they say, oh, get your selenium from Brazil nuts. Now, guess what Brazil nuts are high in? Well, they're high in oxalates. Brazil nuts are pretty much one of the highest nuts for oxalates. They're like tied with almonds for their oxalate content. And so I was downing all these Brazil nuts to get my selenium, and I was just loading up my body with oxalates. This is, like I said, this is before I went strict carnivore. But that was part of the protocol, is like, oh, get your selenium. And similarly, the vitamin C, I was taking these high dose vitamin C pills, and those turn into oxalates as well. So like vitamin C is well known to degrade into oxalates when it's inside your body. And so that was yet another huge dose of oxalates. And that's before I really understood plant toxins and how oxalates impacted the body. Now, what I know from learning about oxalates is that oxalates crystallize in your thyroid. And actually, it's been shown that roughly 80% of adults have oxalate crystals in their thyroid. Isn't that insane? So the vast majority of adults actually have oxalates in their thyroid. And the problem is, I never heard the word oxalate mentioned once in the work of David Brownstein and the whole high dose iodine community. They never mentioned it. In fact, they recommended, vitamin C and oxalate containing Brazil nuts to get your selenium. So this is really unfortunate, because oxalates might be the true culprit behind things like hypothyroid issues and other thyroid dysfunction. And this whole community is missing that. So fortunately, I did two things that were good. I ended up stopping taking the high dose iodine, and I switched from the keto diet to the carnivore diet. And when I did those two things, all of a sudden my thyroid started coming back to normal. Everything is feeling better. Oh, my hypothyroid symptoms are going away. I no longer have cold sensitivity. I no longer have cold limbs. I don't have these hot flashes and cold flashes. I don't have pain in my thyroid anymore. And so in a fascinating way, just stopping taking the iodine and going on a strict carnivore diet, which by the way is a zero oxalate diet, that completely healed my thyroid. And it managed to get me out of that rabbit hole, hell, that I was in. So I went down the wrong rabbit hole, basically. So the high dose iodine protocol appears to be the wrong rabbit hole to go down. And I managed to get myself out of that hole. And I did it through the carnivore diet, which, by the way, allows you to oxalate dump, right? Once you go on the carnivore diet, you can finally release the oxalates from your thyroid and from other organs as well, and then you can dump those out. And I'm guessing that helped to heal my thyroid. And like I said, I had never had thyroid issues in my entire life until I did this high dose iodine protocol. So I just wanted to share that with you as an interesting lesson. And there's another deep issue, which is that you should never take one toxin in order to detox another toxin, right? So like the principle of the iodine protocol was we need to detox these halides. We need to detox bromine and fluoride and chlorine, right? We need to get them out of our bodies. But they inserted toxins into the protocol in the form of oxalates that meant that you were basically kicking out one toxin but replacing it with another. And so that's a good lesson because I've seen this happen in other contexts. Like I've seen, for example, the heavy metal community that says like, oh, like here's how you detox heavy metals with plants, right? And then they give you a whole bunch of plants that you can use, like microgreens and sprouts and spirulina and chlorella or whatever, in order to detox heavy metals. But aren't you just replacing one toxin with another? Because plants have plant toxins, they have defense chemicals, and you could just be replacing one toxic chemical with another toxic one. So just be aware that our medical system, and not just our medical system, but our even our holistic health system, is getting attacked by protocols that sometimes are toxic themselves. Sometimes the protocols that you use to detox can actually be toxic. And so that's my take on the high dose iodine protocol. And of course, I'm grateful for everyone who has tried to spread education about the issues around halogens and halides. And I do still believe that these other halogens, like fluoride, like chlorine, like bromide, that they are still toxic, and that we should try our best to keep them out of our bodies. So, of course, we do still filter our water to get those things out of our water, right? I have a fluoride filter. So I'm definitely not a fan of the other halogens. The question is, what protocol do you use to get those things out of your body? And does this high dose iodine protocol really work? Because for me, on a personal level, it did not work. And at least, I tried it for 3 months, right? So like, and someone will come back and say, oh, you didn't try it long enough, right? But at least for 3 months, it did not work. Okay. And I would say the best healing of my thyroid came when I went on carnivore, because then I got to get rid of the oxalates. And then my thyroid was like, oh, thank you for getting those crystals out of my thyroid, right? Okay, that's my thoughts on iodine, oxalates, and thyroid health.